Yes, what do you think took you to be diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer? What was going on?
Well, I come from a pretty crazy background.
Thank you so much for being here at the Mediterranean Diet Solution. It's really an honor to have you here to dig into the science of cancer, the field of cancer in general, how we can prevent it, and people that are listening that they already go through, which is the main message that we want to transmit. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I love the vision of what you're creating with this summit as well.
Thanks. But maybe first you wanna tell us a little bit about your personal health journey and what took you to write the book. I have it here, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer.
Well, I think like many of us who end up on a summit like this or with each other is we've had our own personal touch with a condition, a situation, and I'm no different. I had my own diagnosis of stage 4 ovarian cancer. By the time they figured out what the heck was going on with a very young 19-year-old, they kind of missed it for a while. Not kind of, they did miss it for a while. By the time they figured it out, I was too far down the rabbit hole to even take on conventional therapies because my organs had gone into failure as well. My kidneys, my liver, my cardiac muscle was very stressed. I was tachycardic, and I was filled with loads and loads of fluid. So my electrolytes were off. So I was in trouble by the time they figured it out. And so, sometimes when you're told there's no way to overcome something, it frankly opens up many doors of possibilities. So if I had been sort of even a few months before and they might have said, hey, this is what you have to do, I would have done that, and likely, just given the nature of that particular cancer type, wouldn't be having this conversation with you now almost 28 years later.
Yes, what do you think took you to be diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer? What was going on?
Well, I come from a pretty crazy background, lots of sort of trauma experiences, poverty, lots of heavy stress, lots of trying to be normal in a world that was completely not normal, like where my life and my home life and my living life was so different than my life in school and with my friends and my boyfriend and those types of things at the time. And so I kind of just suppressed a lot and sort of glossed over a lot of what was going on with me because I just wanted to be a normal person, a normal teenager. So by the time this hit while I was in college, by the time it got big enough and loud enough to get my attention, I was also in a pretty dark place in my life because of many different circumstances. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be here. In fact, several years before, I had tried to take my own life. And it was, for me, I think, in that moment when someone's like, your death is imminent and it's in your face, it's that moment you realize, not so fast. I think I do want to stick around. And so it was like, as I tell people a lot of the times, it was like it sort of lit my inner pilot light and gave me a motivation to try and do something different. And really at that time, the first moment was sort of shock and also bewilderment in trying to support the doctor who was giving me the diagnosis, because he too had a 19-year-old daughter. So it was very emotional for him to tell me. And then my next emotion wave was rage when I went in to see, they sent me into an oncologist for kind of a second opinion. And I was very dismissed and basically told, you're gonna die. You have no insurance. You have no money to pay for these therapies. Your organs are in stage failure, that one treatment may likely take your life even faster. You've probably got a few months, if that. Now looking back retrospectively, I probably had even less time than that, just given the state of what was going on. So sometimes not having a Dr. Google, which wasn't available in 1991, and not having loads of people giving me their well-meaning advice, I sort of went into the darkness of the soul and figured it out on my own in a very private way. And here I am, like still learning, still applying things to myself, still learning things for myself to apply to patients, and what patients experience I learn to apply to myself. So I look at this as a very much partnership, collaborative life learning journey for all. So where it could have collapsed me into despair or rage or why me, it actually made me say, well, why not me? Why not anybody else? So what can we do about it? And how can we change the course of this?
Yeah. So basically, one of the main triggers for you was stress, which people don't really see it as a main trigger for diseases, but is the main cause of diseases in our society right now.
Yeah. And, today we all have stress. It's just, if you live on the planet, you're going to have stress, but it's how we respond to it, how we react to it. And some of us are epigenetically wired to sort of rev at a little different, RPM than others. And so if you have those SNPs, if you have some of those tendencies to kind of be a stress monger, you have to take extra careful steps to change that. So that is like an ongoing journey for me. It's easy to do the diet. It's easy to do the lifestyle. It's easy to do the supplements and all those things. It is not so easy to keep on top of stress response.
It is. And probably you're a really busy person, so that causes a lot of stress. And stress is always there. I always say that that's how we protect the body against the stressors. That is what is really important. So then as a naturopath, how you consider which is the difference, the approach between conventional medicine and naturopathic medicine to approach cancer?
Perfect. Well, really, our first couple of years are identical. You can only learn the basic sciences as the basic sciences: biochemistry, pathology, anatomy, physiology, etc. Where we differ is what gets infused in the early years of our training is our philosophy. The concept of, the vis naturae, which is the vital force within us, the natural essence of our being. We're meant to be healthy. That's like our little God-given right. And yet we live on a planet today that sort of creates an environment that we have to work a lot harder to maintain or achieve the health that was sort of promised to us. And so there's that side. Now, the other element that changes our philosophy is we very much believe that disease processes are created over time and accumulate over time, and that we are far more powerful than we're led to believe to change the course of the trajectory of it. To me, actually, I think what is really powerful is I love having my basic science background. I refer back to even my undergraduate physiology courses that really taught me the understanding down to the cellular level to know how we're impacting things and to bring it up to the gross level, to the outside level of our life experience. My clinical, conventional oncology and conventional allopathic colleagues, they're taught those things as well, but the way they're taught about approaching it is much more linear and much more algorithmic. So this collection of symptoms is possibly these collection of diseases with possibly these collection of treatments. So it's got this algorithm that flows. But we as naturopathic doctors go a bit further down to the root cause. Well, why do we have that collection of symptoms? What led to that collection of symptoms? We are not so taken up by the diagnosis, the big label that lays over it. We're curious about why we got to that point, and we have a lot more wide variety approaches in our toolbox. I mean, we can even use surgery and chemotherapy very naturopathically. It's even the way we apply the treatments that differ from our colleagues, that we are looking to restore the function versus replace the function. We're not looking to wreak havoc on the body or create a battle against the body. We're trying to harness its natural rhythm and bring it back into a state of homeostasis, of balance. And so those are some things that really differ. We have to take the same kind of the scientific boards to make sure we understand our basic sciences before we dive into the clinical. And when we get through our clinical rotations, we have to take kind of an exit exam similar to our conventional colleagues. And then we have now options. We have options of residencies and internships and specialization, which takes further education. I, for one, did that. I have my FABNO, Fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. So I did do extensive kind of postgraduate work to achieve that status. And we have the same amounts of CEUs. We have to still maintain malpractice. Depending on the state where you're licensed, we might be able to deliver babies or do minor surgery or prescribe medications. So where I carry my license, those are all things I could have done. Now living in the state of Colorado, and actually right now in my sister-in-law's home in Pasadena or Altadena, California for the time being, We have different kind of legalities within those environments. But because of the creativity of our profession, I can sort of morph and adapt to whatever medical environment I'm in. So I might be presenting like I did last week at a huge neurosurgery conference on glioblastoma with ketogenic diet. And then I might go, as I did this weekend, and do a deep intensive training for physicians from all over the world on application of mistletoe. Or as I'm doing next week in London, I might be presenting to a bunch of naturopathic colleagues at an international naturopathic conference. And then a few hours later, I'll be at a conference called the True Fields Conference, which is literally lay people coming to an environment that's like a medical conference meets a hippy dippy festival. And it's this beautiful outdoor like stage of doctors from all over the world with really innovative ideas coming
That's
together
awesome.
to just be with the patients out in nature. And I'll get to do like Wim Hof water, cold ice plunge baths and the whole bit. So the eclectic field that my profession allows, I get to participate in a lot of unique environments, both clinically, medically, scientifically, research centrically, and very much about restoring the rhythm and balance within ourselves. So I feel lucky to be on this path of medicine because it allows me to kind of play in a lot of different sandboxes.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And you were talking about that naturopathic medicine work on the root cause, that usually root causes, not just one root cause. So then in your book, this brings me to talk about the terrain 10, which you call it to some of the key 10 elements that are important to keep a balance to prevent cancer, or maybe with one of them is imbalance, it's important to identify which one so you can establish a comprehensive treatment. So could you tell us a little bit about the terrain 10?
Sure. So I kind of liken the body to a bucket. Okay, and the label on that bucket would be the mitochondria. The mitochondria are they're our little engine that could. They are the power sources of our body. If we don't have ATP, which produces energy, we don't live. And the resource and the factory in which that's made is in our mitochondria, which are like little organs within each of our cells. Mm-hmm. And that organ is dependent on what we put in, on, and around it, whether it's food, air, water, stress, toxicants, chemicals, sunshine, blue light exposure, any of those things. So in my career, I've noticed 10 main like sort of issues that can affect that mitochondrial bucket. And so I liken it to like a drop in the bucket. So the 10 main things we look at are the epigenetics. So those are the things that have been passed down many generations above you. They're not in stone. They're dynamic and they depend on us to help change their expression. So if you say, oh, my dad had a heart attack and my grandfather had a heart attack, so therefore I'll have a heart attack, that's not correct. You can change that. And it's by knowing your ancestors, knowing your relations, knowing your predecessors that gives you clues of, hey, I've got some patterns and tendencies, so I better start working on it now, instead of waiting for it to afflict me and then deal with it. So epigenetics is one thing we have great power over, and we can learn by doing some testing like Nutrition Genome or 23andMe, although their database is a little bit skewed these days thanks to being bought up by a pharmaceutical company, but that's another story. Yeah. But those are things we can really learn about and know what deck of cards we were dealt in this lifetime and then how to play them in our favor to win the game, right?
Talking about the epigenetics, sorry to stop you here. Yeah. So which are usually, why do we have DNA mistakes? Because as you said, we are 10% of our genetics, but maybe we are the carriers of certain genes, but we don't have to express it. So what is taken to the DNA mistakes, and which are usually the most common mutations or genes involved in cancer?
Well, and it's interesting because we are, actually, like you said, somewhere between 5 and 10% of us are truly genetically abhorrent and will have issues. But of that rest, let's say that 95%, these are the genes we were dealt, but we can turn them on and off at will with our diet and lifestyle approaches. Mm-hmm. And specifically to that, the ones that seem to kind of, what I personally see in my practice, because maybe researchers or other clinicians might have a different impression, but what seems to be common themes of epigenetic hiccups that I see are vitamin D receptor site issues, VDR, CYP1B1. This is a particular detox pathway, that the 1B1 pathway from the liver, that is very important in how it detoxifies hormones, exogenous and endogenous, chemicals, that we're exposed to on a daily basis in our food supply and the world around us. I also see issues with COMT, which we alluded to in the very beginning of our conversation about stress. This is all about catecholamine. And basically, when you're under extreme stress and you have COMT SNPs, your body rushes all of this epinephrine and norepinephrine into the tissues and then sequesters it there. And that just sends off all kinds of little grow baby grow signals into the rest of the body, which can absolutely feed cancer process and cancer metastasis. So those are kind of three biggies. MTHFR plays some roles. Some of the others like MTHFR can affect also how we methylate or detoxify certain things that are coming our way. Those seem to be kind of the biggest trends. And now we also are able to look at SNPs like ESR2, MDM2, GATA3, TP53. These are basically DNA repair SNPs. And you mentioned this. It's like we accumulate a lot of DNA damage on a regular basis. In fact, some research will show we get it up to about 70,000 times a day that we could experience a hiccup in our genetics, but our bodies are built to go, oop, turn it back on, oop, turn it back off, oop, and like constantly in real time editing, cleaning it up, breaking it down, clearing it out, cleaning up the system. It's when that system gets bogged down on everything in, on, and around us, mentally, physically, and spiritually, is when that editing process becomes bumped, becomes inefficient and ineffective. Okay. And so that's where this integrative terrain-centric approach is critical, because that's what we were meant to do. We were meant to be able to edit all of these insults to our DNA on a regular basis. And some of us have more difficulty in doing that than others simply by the deck of cards we were given. So for instance, some folks might be like BRCA, the BRCA gene. A lot of people freak out. They're like, let me go remove my breast or my ovaries. And yet this is actually one of those epigenetic hiccups that can easily be overcome with our dietary and lifestyle modification. And so, for instance, like BRCA genes really shouldn't be having radiation to their breast tissue on a regular basis. Radiation stimulates the malfunctioning response within that SNP. So it's like we're trying to help women be more vigilant of watching their breast tissue, but we're actually adding to the problem. And then cutting out that tissue, we can't actually prevent. That is very much, to me, a dangerous game to play, that it's giving people a sense of well-being that doesn't, frankly, exist. And so what would be better is if people are opting to cut things off, they need to still do a terrain assessment. They still need to look under the hood and see what's there. Because I've personally, in my clinical practice, had 7 women who did prophylactic surgeries who years later came back with cancer everywhere. And 2 of them succumbed to that. And 5 of them are still working hard to overcome that. But it was a shock. The shock to them was like, well, I did everything I was supposed to do. I did everything right. No, they didn't. They might have hacked off their breasts or took away their ovaries, but they didn't change the soil. Right. And that's what, when we kind of to carry on into the bucket theme, each of those drops is contributing to the overall health and vitality of the soil within and to the inner garden of each of us. And so if you have these epigenetic hiccups, but you're still eating a lot of sugar, so dysglycemia and sugar issues is another drop. Or if you've got some predispositions and you are putting massive toxicants, you're still using Teflon pans, you're still using commercial body care products and cleaning products, you're using air fresheners, you're, like spending time and like using Roundup on your gardens.
You're carcinogenic.
If you have microbiome issues because you've taken loads of antibiotics, or you aren't eating good quality food and you're eating food that is dismantling your microbiome, or you weren't breastfed, or you weren't, or you were a C-section baby from the get-go, you were already way behind your microbiome development, or you use a lot of triclosan and hand sanitizers everywhere you go, you are wiping out your body's defenses. And then if you are dealing with a lot of inflammation, like you are constantly maybe overtraining, overworking out, as bad as just sitting on a couch all day, or that you have a chronic injury that's not recovering, or you are dealing with, again, high sugar diets will increase inflammation as well. Or if you've got issues where you're poorly perfusing for oxygen, you're not moving your body, you're not taking deep, breaths beyond the diaphragm, and you're not, maybe your blood counts are very low and your oxygen levels are low because you can't get them to the peripheral tissues. That's a breeding ground for cancer. And then when we look further, like hormones, we're all stewing in a big exogenous xenoestrogen soup today that I would actually argue with the most profound hormone experts out there that we are actually not needing hormone replacement at all. We're actually needing hormone cleanup and an ability to metabolize it differently, because our issues are not about, oh, we're deficient. In fact, I'm here to tell you, most of us are actually estrogen dominant, men as well. And so these are some conversations. And then when we look at stress response, circadian rhythms, we talked about that kind of in the beginning. I started my day off beginning of this week in Baltimore, Maryland. Now I'm in Altadena, California. That is really tough on the body. I have to work very hard. And the way I mitigate things like that, which we'll go into in a moment, is fasting. So this is my fasting week. If I'm going to be bi-coastal and then on Monday I fly to London, it's like, I got to get myself primed. I got to get those DNA ready to deal with the changes in my system. And then finally, the mental emotional patterns that affect us all. That's where we actually kind of started our conversation of things like the ACE score, adverse childhood events, and other things, increasing our risk of chronic illness as a whole. As you mentioned, we don't take it as seriously as it should be taken. I've had many patients, and I'm sure you've coached a lot of these folks and met a lot of these folks, who do everything perfectly. They exercise just the right amount. They know their SNPs. They know their epigenetics to know precisely how is best to eat. They look at their labs, and their labs are gorgeous because they're watching and titrating everything. And they're doing beautifully with their chemical exposures in their environment. And they're really working on building up their microbiome, the whole bit. Guess what? They can only carry that container so far down the road. But if there is some emotional baggage to be dealt with, some old trauma to be dealt with, some really crappy energetic, like if you're in really bad relationships or a really bad job you hate, or you don't know your purpose and passion on this planet, it's going to be challenging to keep you well, to get you well and to keep you well. And so those are the droplets in the bucket that affect each of us. And 99% of the time when I'm working with a new client or a doctor now, I consult with doctors only now on their patients, the patients will always say, or the doctor will tell me, the patient was healthy until they got cancer. I'm here to tell you that has never been the case ever, and it never will be. It's an impossibility. We are like those frogs that get dropped into a cold pot of water on the stove, and we turn up the heat slowly until it eventually boils and kills the frog. And it's so comfortable and heating up so carefully that we don't even notice what is happening inside of us. That is what we're all living on. We're all a bunch of frogs in cold water, and it's heating up slowly underneath us. So you have to figure out what's going on for you, and don't wait until you have a problem. Start much sooner.
Yeah, I really like how you have put kind of together all the 10 terrains in there. And I do really like the example that you gave about the hormone replacement, because a lot of women, even if it's bioidentical or not, we do need to work on what is imbalance in the hormones. I was an example in the past years ago. I was super stressed with my environment, and then I ended losing my menstrual cycle. I became an estrogen dominant woman. I had adrenal fatigue. But then, I said, okay, this is it. I have to stop it here. And then I started working on it, changing my lifestyle. And then I rebalanced my hormones back. I got my menstrual cycle. So that's a very good example that we do not need to take just hormone replacement therapy. And sometimes that can even cause more damage. So that was a really good example.
Yeah. Well, and even those SNPs we talked about, if you have COMT CYP1B1 SNPs, you are not a candidate for hormone replacement, in my opinion. That's how dangerous. It's like a Russian roulette game with that. And the one thing, just to kind of let your listeners know, that menopause is a natural part of our life, and what only the westernized environments are experiencing problematic symptoms in association with this. And here's why. Because in normal, healthy, rhythmic bodies and beings, in this natural rhythm of our lives, we normally hand the baton from the ovaries over to the adrenal glands to say, I'm retiring. It's your turn to carry the load. And that's what carries us into our long, healthy longevity quality of life. But by the time women in the West get to that phase, their adrenals are crisp potatoes. They are fried to the core. There's nothing left. It's like burnt to cinders on the ground. So the ovaries hand over the baton. They're like, oh boy, no one's here. No one's here to take the race. And that is what creates the bumpy, symptoms. And so we just think we'll just keep them in premenopausal estrogen levels and that'll do it. That will only crank the engine, fry the engine, and age the engine quicker. And I know there's studies that show otherwise, but I'm looking at the patient. I'm not looking at the bench side data. I'm looking at the reality of the patient. And in my 27 years in career, I have never had to have people on bioidentical hormones to replace and restore their function of hormonal balance, or restoring menses, or helping them smooth through menopause. Okay, we go into the why. And people like our colleague, Anna Kabeka, she's a medical doctor who specializes in this. She actually uses things like ketogenic diet to get women's hormones smoothed out to enter into the phase of menopause, because it often is about too much stress, too much sugar, and too little joy and laughter and playtime. And as women today on the planet, I'm so like a woman of women's rights, women's live, all those pieces. But I also think we've done a disservice to ourselves, because just because we can do everything doesn't mean we should do everything.
One of the key elements you talk about, the microbiome and the gut, the second brain, which is so important. Yeah. So important for preventing cancer. So how gastrointestinal inflammation can be linked to cancer, and specifically the microbes in our gut? Is there any specific, which are the most common infections that you may see or imbalances?
I remember reading Dr. Gershon's book in the early 90s that came out in actually the late 80s, The Second Brain. And everyone basically thought this guy was a whack nut. They threw him under the bus. They just sort of dismissed all of his data. But as a naturopathic doctor and a practitioner of Chinese medicine, I also have my degree in that, as well as studied Ayurveda for 13 years. All of those vitalistic therapies saw the gut as the starting point or the ending point of health and disease, right? Even Hippocrates says it's like all disease starts in the gut. So that has been so dismissed by standard of care for so long, until just a couple years ago, really. Even a few years ago, I would have been telling patients for 20 years that 80% of your serotonin happens in your GI tract. That was totally dismissed and now is proven. The other thing I was telling folks is if you've got major dysbiosis, you will have poor absorption of your foods, of your nutrients, but also poor absorption and function of the pharmaceuticals you might be putting in. You're going to have a different response. They thought I was crazy, ignored that. Proof in the pudding now. We're saying, oh, by the way, your microbiome depends on how you respond to chemotherapy. Jeez Louise, things like that. Immune therapies now, the big rage, billion-dollar industry of research, and they're finding that these checkpoint inhibitors, the PD-L1s, won't work if we don't have a good store of bifidus in our GI tract, which basically if you weren't vaginally delivered and weren't breastfed, you already don't have any bifidus. So right there's so many, people coming into this world that haven't got the right building blocks to utilize and create a functioning immune system. And now we're starting to actually catch up with like the GALT and the MALT, these lymphocytic, immune modulators in our GI tract. We're now finding that probably most of our immune system is actually based in the central station of our gut. And so it's ironic in that many of the treatments today for cancer and a lot of other conditions totally eradicate the GI tract. One really crazy example is when we do our preventative colonoscopy, and the prep the doctors give to patients to take to clean the whistle before they go in and have a camera shoved up there is we'll take away 99% of the gut flora. So this thing we're doing to prevent cancer by looking up your hoo-ha to see what's going on in there, we've actually just wiped out all of your immune system. So now we've actually made you more vulnerable to a cancer taking off. These are the crazy things that we're learning about. And every single day, Elena, you've probably seen this yourself. There's a new research article coming out saying, hey, if you've got, too much too many of the A's and not enough the B's, you're going to have more obesity, which is amazing. major metabolic nightmare that makes for higher incidence of all chronic illness, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, you name it. If you have not enough bifidus, you don't have a functioning immune system, and you don't respond to immune therapies. If you are on an antibiotic, you're also adding more insult to injury by continuing to wipe out those critters, but also messing with the metabolic syndrome processes and creating fatty liver. And I mean, there's just so many pieces. You cannot not consider the gut health when dealing with a chronic illness of any kind. And even today, our food responses, we have more food allergies on the planet today than ever before. And that's thanks to a time where 100 years ago, our crops were very diversified. Our soil was very rich in nutrients. We got everything we needed from nature, from the earth, from the foods around us. But after the Cold War, we started to monocrop. We started to subsidize farmers to get rid of all those other, very diverse crops that we grew for many, many years. And we focused on corn, soybean, wheat, barley, cotton. That was it. And so what we've done is we've monocropped the planet, which has strongly depleted the soils. And that has in turn monocropped us. So where we had major microbiome diversity for millennia, we're now kind of monocropped just like our planet. We are an expression of our environment. And then what's happened is since the 1970s and really picked up momentum in the 90s, we started to utilize Roundup or glyphosate on our crops to ripen them at the same time so that we could have better yield and better financial outcomes. Okay, not better health outcomes, better financial outcomes. And today everyone thinks, well, I'm eating organic, so therefore that's fine. It isn't, because glyphosate doesn't recognize boundaries. It doesn't recognize fence lines or property lines. It has a 2-mile spread in the air, in the soil, and in the water. And so the food sources that sequester glyphosate the most, that hold it in its DNA that then we eat, the highest rates of this are in our legumes and in our grains. So even though there have been many cultures who've been very pulse centric in their dietary, intake, they're now dying of diseases they never had before because of the DNA changes that the glyphosate has made to these food crops. They're now killing these patients. So India is a perfect example. When I went there for the first time in the early 90s, diabetes and cancer were just a blink on the radar. When I returned in the early 2000s, diabetes was becoming a growing problem. Today, their rate of diabetes and cancer are starting to exceed what we have here in the United States. And this is a culture that's been eating this particular way for thousands and thousands of years. And the food that so nourished them for so long is now killing them.
Yeah. It is crazy how they play with the food with us. And, there are even studies like immigrants like us, we come from another country that they don't use as many pesticides, genetically modified organisms, we have a more diverse microbiome. And then when we come here, we adapt to the Western diet, is losing a lot of the good beneficial bacteria in our gut, and we start getting more obese, a higher risk of diabetes. Is crazy.
Yeah.
Something really interesting that you said is like when we prepare for a colonoscopy, that is wiping out 99% of the bacteria. So which are your thoughts about colon hydrotherapy and coffee enemas, which are usually known to be really beneficial for cancer patients?
Excellent. Well, remember what you're taking, the Go Lightly or some of those products you're taking in orally. So you're processing them from the top of the tube down. And it's basically the main component of the wash that they give you is radiator fluid. Okay, it's propylene glycol. Just go Google propylene glycol and cancer and other things. You'll see it's a known endocrine disruptor, and it's a questionable carcinogen. When it says questionable, run the other way. Don't. It doesn't have to be definitive.
I used to use propylene glycol when I work in the lab, when I was staining cells to permeabilize the cells and fix them. So imagine what it's doing in our gut when we eat it.
So it's like, this is, I'm like, look at all the reports on like radiator fluid bottles are like, danger, death will ensue if you drink this. So we put this in people before we go and scope them. But when we do colonics, depending on how often, how frequent, depending on how we are nourishing the whole, You can overdo it if you're not careful, if you're not working with someone who knows how to keep that balance on track. If you're eating a very monocropped diet and you're doing colonics regularly and you're not replenishing your electrolytes, you're not replenishing bowel flora with good pre and probiotic rich foods or supplements, if you have to take that extra level, you could theoretically be washing out the lower part of your GI tract, which is also very important. And of course, the organisms we have up north in our small intestine and down south in our colon are different for different reasons. They have different jobs, different job descriptions. And so you can throw off the balance if you're over hitting one area. So oftentimes I even have like really well-trained colon hydrotherapists will actually do inoculations. Like they might take sauerkraut juice and put it up and have a retention, or open up probiotics and do a retention at the end of the treatment, or encourage the patient to maybe propagate for a few days following a treatment. These are simple fixes that we don't have to get hung up on to make them work well for us, because also every culture prior to the westernized world has been utilizing some form of rectal medicine or rectal treatment, be it basti from the Ayurvedic practice or enemas for forever. And so, when we used to, before Tylenol hit the market, to lower a baby's fever that was really, really high, we didn't give them a Tylenol. We didn't have that then. We used cool compresses in the back of their neck. We put their feet into cold water to cool the fire. And if that didn't do it, the backup plan was to take one of those little bulb syringes or some type of a little syringe type of process and basically put warm water, not hot, not cold, warm water up the rectum, just a couple ounces into that, and it will wash it out. It's incredible how quickly it'll drop a fever. And yet when we started to introduce fever suppression, we also started to change a lot of things in our internal clock, circadian rhythm, in our immune system, in our gut microbiome. And we've really created a population that is quite damaged just from our immunosuppressive therapies. Tylenol itself is one of the worst offenders to mitochondrial damage known to man. Cipro, Tylenol, and doxycycline or doxorubicin, adriamycin, a type of chemotherapy, are literally in the top list of mitochondrial poisons out there.
Wow. So then for the enemas, do you suggest, because for cancer patients, it is known, cancer patients and with colon cancer, they need to have more than one enema a day. But that can be too much when we are thinking about the bacteria. So how often, which kind, how do we alternate maybe between coffee, probiotic enemas?
And it's so individualized. I'll look at their SNPs, I'll look at their diet, I'll look at their dietary history. I'll look at the course of their treatment. I will look at what other medication supplements they're on. I will look at their food preferences. Do they eat a well-rounded diet? Do they like their bitters? Do they eat live fermented foods? Things like that. So it's going to differ from patient to patient. If they're extremely weak, I often won't use something as intense as a coffee enema. Maybe I will use just a warm water enema with maybe a pinch of baking soda, just something that's like nourishing, that invites the colon to open up and dump some of the toxins, but not forcing it out. Colon, coffee enemas are pretty potent. They will absolutely, what's the word I'm looking for? They will absolutely wipe out the microbiome too much, but they will also strongly vasodilate the portal vein. And they will also kind of stress the liver, push the liver to dump. That's great if you've got a pretty robust constitution, but if you're in a depleted, weakened state, that can actually leave you feeling more depleted and weakened. So I guess my point of this is take it step by step, person by person. But that's where I'm hoping is these are the questions to ask of yourself if you're taking on these therapies, or your practitioner is supporting you. Get a sense of exactly what you need and when you need it. We don't have to guess, and not everybody needs or should be doing the same treatment approach.
So then, in order to identify which is the key element from those terrain 10 that you were talking about, which one is affecting your body, actually, in your book, you have a questionnaire for each of them. So people can start identifying which one it is, right? That's really powerful.
Yeah, it's that 10-part questionnaire with 10 questions within each area. And we hoped that it would be questions that you might not consider regularly for yourself. And so it's just a moment for you to start to look at, what is my priority? And I want people to read this book before they get sick so that they can headed off at the pass. But people are often shocked and like, wow, my priority is sugar and stress response, or my priority is blood circulation and inflammation. Everyone's going to find there are 2 or 3 main starting points. And what I encourage people to know is that, or want to invite people to hear, is that anywhere you start is going to have an impact in a positive way. All connected.
Yeah, and we will have to work on different root causes, but actually one that is affecting one factor, affecting every single one of them, is diet.
Yes.
It's food. It's what you say, the pesticides, the high glycemic index, all of those things. So maybe we can go a little bit into the approach for the diet. So we hear that sugar feeds cancer cells. How does it really work? How sugar has been linked to cancer?
Got it. Well, today with these conversations around low carb and keto and which diet is the best diet for cancer, I want to remind your listeners that before 1850, before the introduction of the Industrial Food Revolution, before we started milling and processing sugar and flour, we were all low carb. By nature, naturally. We were all taking about 30% of our calories in as carbohydrate. And we worked very physically hard to do that. And we were only exposed to things very seasonally as well. So with the natural flow of the season, we didn't have much, we might have some starchy root vegetables and maybe some old apples in the cellar through the winter months, but really we didn't have a lot of sugar in the winter. Where we had the most amount of sugar was in the summer, at the heat of it, when we're most active, most outdoors, most in this, and also preparing for the dark days. We had a natural rhythm to the way we took in our nutrients at different times of the year. And in fact, in winter, most people would enter into states of ketosis very easily, which is the hybrid engine that each of us came to this world with, okay? Where we can easily burn glucose or carbohydrates, or we can easily burn ketones or fatty acids. And we're supposed to move in and out of those effortlessly, because we didn't have a Circle K on every corner to feed us 24/7 every day of the year. We had to work for our food. We had to ration for our food. And we went many times with many days or even weeks on end sometimes without certain foods. And we were able to thrive in those moments to keep our clarity and keep our wits about us to survive, and to also find that next source of food. But today, we don't have to look any further than often our handbag to find a snack, right? Always. We are so overfed today and so undernourished, and we're also so petrified of hunger. So when you take a vehicle, if you actually took your car and you filled the gas tank with sugar, you might sputter down the road for a little bit, but you'll break down. And it will destroy the engine. It rusts out the engine. It creates this muckiness. That is what sugar has been doing to us since we started putting it into everything since the 1850s. We've basically started rusting ourselves slowly from the inside out. And now that dual hybrid engine of where we've been is now stuck in sugar carbohydrate burning mode. And so when people try and back off and lower their carbs, they will feel crummy. You go through a major carbohydrate withdrawal and you feel yucky, so people aren't inclined to go much further than that. But once you pop over and are able to kind of go back and forth, there is a level of freedom in your psychology, in your physical being, that feels comfortable in feast or famine states and should feel comfortable. And at different times when we're ill, if you watch animals in nature, they won't eat, or they'll eat to purge. Like they might just nosh on some grass to get it out. But for us today, we're like, oh my God, take something more, put a pill in, eat some more food, cover up the pain. That's what we do so much now with sugar. We're looking for sweetness in our life through food instead of through, ritual, through living, through thriving.
Yeah, prosperity and sedentary life. That's what made us sick, all of us.
And it's such a mixed bag. Like I believe, can have the best of both worlds. I think you can have this feeling of abundance without gorging yourself, into oblivion. Yeah.
And which is your thought? Because, years ago when somebody was going through cancer, they say, okay, you gotta go on a vegan diet and then start juicing 15 pounds of vegetables a day because it's full of antioxidants, eliminate free radicals, tissue damage, you have glucosinolates that are also really potent. However, that can spike depending on the type of vegetables or sugar a lot. So your approach, as you said, is the ketogenic diet. So how do you compare ketogenic versus vegan diet for a cancer approach?
Well, here's actually how I look at it. I look at, like, even though in our book and in the title, that was more of a publishing company decision, not mine. Because I've been practicing this for myself and for tens of thousands of patients for over 25 years at this point. And what I've always strived for was metabolic flexibility. And the common denominators of all of these dietary dogmas that are beneficial to the longevity of our cells is plant dense, sugar depleted, like sugar low. So when you approach it from that, you get out of the realm of keto versus vegan versus paleo versus vegetarian versus earth, breatharian, whatever. You get down to a point of how can you eat the most diverse, something that will bring the most diversity to your microbiome? Because when we juice, we also, at least the type of juicing that they used at that time was without the pulp. So you didn't have the fiber. That is a problem. Your microbiome depends on your fiber. So juicing often mitigates the fiber. So I tell people, if you're going to juice, I want you using something like a Blend Tech or a Vitamix, so you're getting the fiber in there as well. That also has an impact on your blood sugar, but definitely your microbiome. And then the other thing is when people talk about those original vegan diets or the Gerson therapy of those juicing, Father Gerson, the father created this, the dad, the Dr. Gerson, he also had people taking raw liver every day. Okay. And because the main things that are depleted in our cancer patients are magnesium, B12, selenium, zinc, vitamin D3, and K2. All right. When you're a vegetarian or vegan, you are depleted in almost all of those. All right. This isn't me being a doctor. This is coming from a person who was 24 years as a vegetarian, or not 24, 17 years as a vegetarian, 7 of those years as a vegan. Okay. And 2 of those years as a raw food vegan. Because I kept, like, the sicker I got, the more I thought I had to be more rigid with my diet. And I was collapsing in on myself and my dogma was killing me. So then, thanks to things like labs that I started running in the late 90s, I started to realize I'm a metabolic nightmare. My thyroid is totally destroyed from all the soy products I'm eating because I was not born in Asia. I was not meant to be eating these things. I do not have the microbiome of that area. All the studies that showed positive outcomes of soy were done in soy countries that were raised on soy. And all the studies show that if you were raised on a soy diet, like edamame and whatnot, in a culture of that, you are geared for that. But if you're, this crazy lady in the West trying to start to increase those things in your life years, decades down the road, probably not going to work as well. Yeah. So those are some examples. But ultimately, a lot of these ideas around diets have not panned out specifically. We now have 21 research trials in the United States for ketogenic diet with cancer with incredible outcomes, but it's in addition to another therapy, not as a standalone. And so a lot of people who think that a particular diet is going to be the end all be all for them are really grossly misled because it's a part of a process. So if you just sat there and juiced till the cows come home on your vegan diet, that's not going to do it. And same thing if you are just gobbling down all the fat and sticking with a ketogenic diet, that's not going to do it either. You have to be looking under the hood to see what makes you tick. And some of us have certain epigenetics. Like for instance, if you have the ACSL1 SNP, you're someone who is going to take red meat and your body's going to think it's a candy bar and it's going to create metabolic syndrome for you. But if you also have a TCF7L2 SNP, you have never been meant to eat grains ever in your whole life. You don't have the ability to break down those starches. You don't have the amylase levels to do this. And then when it hits your gut, it's like shrapnel, creating major autoimmune reactivity. These are some of the questions that people ask, well, should I eat? I'm like, well, let's look at your SNPs and find out. Let's see where what soil you arose from to address this. So again, it's never black and white, a yes or no. It's what do you need in this moment? What is the right way to support you at its best? And ultimately, the common denominator is we all need to eat less sugar. We all need to eat more vegetables. That's pretty much simple. Beyond that, our dietary needs will change depending on our personality, our cancer type, where we're living, the season, what type of treatment we're going through, what our therapeutic strategy is. I look at the ketogenic diet as a drug, okay? As a drug. People who choose vegan or vegetarianism, that's just a lifestyle. That's a lifestyle. So this is a very different conversation. I'm looking at something that will therapeutically enhance outcomes of my patients. I am not looking at something else, because I have had many a vegan come to me with, newly diagnosed with cancer. And I've even had ketogenic people come to me newly diagnosed with cancer. And I'm like, well, what else were you doing? What else was going on? What else were you missing? And they look at me with deer in headlights, because they're like, oh, I didn't look any further than that. Or I read somewhere that this was the way to do it. Or how many people think, like, I'll tell you, when I'm running something like Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, which are little apps to look at your macros during the day of how many carbohydrates, protein, fats you're taking in, everybody is shocked with how much carbohydrate. And you have to remember, registered dietitians, okay, which this is not a bash of RDs, it's a bash of the system that trained them, okay? So it's not a reflection of them personally, but they're trained by a system, by an industry that is committed to keeping the status quo in an industry. They are not trained in how to therapeutically change people's lives, okay? So even when RD nutritionists are telling us that nobody should be eating more than 100 grams of carbohydrate per day, and that men should not be having more than 25 of those carbohydrates, 25 grams of those carbohydrates as sugar, and women should be having no more than 20 grams of those carbohydrates as sugar. I will tell you this right now, a standard American diet, by the end of breakfast, you've eaten 3 days worth of sugar.
Yeah, that's one yogurt. Yeah, the yogurt has already the 20.
Thank you, exactly. And then when we're vegan or vegetarian, it is very difficult to keep your carbohydrate levels under the level that you need without compromising other nutritional deficiencies. So these are the patterns. I will tell you, I've been able to get a lot of vegetarians metabolically flexible. That's really powerful, but I'm here to tell you firsthand, and I will probably get more hate mail. I get hate mail on this all the time. Totally used to it. Bring it on. Doesn't hurt my feelings. It's not about me. This is about the literature and what your body tells me. Show me your labs and then I will eat my words. But I've never seen a lab showing that a vegan can do this successfully, ever. And this is coming from an ex-vegan. Okay. Yeah. And so
it's always about, we have to accept the reality, and we gotta change it, It's not about being stubborn because we don't feel good with it. So basically, it's not, as you said, as to give a name like ketogenic diet. Basically, it's a low carb diet, anti-inflammatory diet that can be modified based on the one of the terrain thing.
Absolutely.
What's going on. So that's
like Hindu patients that by their own spiritual belief system don't eat meat. But we've been able to take them on a very powerful vegetarian ketogenic journey, which is great. So it doesn't even have to be, if you do have a deep, strong spiritual belief system around this, there are definitely ways to overcome that, but it's more challenging. These folks have to work a lot harder to have the same outcomes as someone who is more of a flexitarian in their approach.
Okay. And then lastly, I want to ask you briefly about a very potent way also, which is within a ketogenic lifestyle, to reset also our hormones, recover mitochondrial dysfunction, which is fasting. So yeah, that's the typical. So for how long, what can you drink during fasting? Which is your favorite way of doing it? And if everybody, depending on which stage they are in cancer, they can do it.
Well, first of all, I love this therapy because it's ancient. It's been around. All cultures use it outside of ours in the West pretty regularly, from some, like from Ramadan to Lent to different times of intermittent fasting in these processes. And, even the Bible talks about the 40 days fasting in the desert. I mean, there's definitely spiritual connotations with it, but it's definitely something that people like Dr. Walter Longo, a longevity researcher, says that if you are able to do a 3 to 5 day fast once to twice a year, you will likely enhance your longevity exponentially. But for something like that, it's free. It will save you money. You will put money in the bank from that. But everyone has to take it at their own pace of where they are, of where their metabolic flexibility is. If you are living on a standard American diet, McDonald's 3 times a week, it's not going to be easy for you to hop right into a water fast. So you're going to work with someone who can help you start to move into that place to be able to do this. So when I have folks who kind of need their training meals at first, as much as it's really crappy quality, the Prolon fasting mimicking diet can be a good training meal for someone who's really hot off the standard American diet train. Okay, that can kind of give them the mental and physical courage to do this. For folks who are a little more seasoned and who just want to do it without going totally water, I start them with maybe really good quality bone broth. If they can't make it themselves. I like the company Bonafide, has a pretty good one that's grass,
Mm-hmm.
pastured, very clean. So what, bone broth, herbal teas, lots of water, lots of extra salt, sea salt, Himalayan salt, extra magnesium if things slow down a little bit in the colon. And then when you kind of graduate to this, working up to a 3-day or longer, don't go longer until you've had some medical support, of a pure water fast. And again, you can add sea salt to your water. You can add apple cider vinegar to your water. Is actually a really great thing that won't throw you out of autophagy, which is your body needs enough break from food and things you're ingesting to go into its natural cleanup system, known as autophagy. The studies show it takes, depending on the person and the situation, 12 to 72 hours to achieve that.
Yeah.
So in the best world, I would like everybody to every single day fast 13 hours. No, finish dinner, say 6 o'clock, don't eat again until 7 a.m. That's every day. And then maybe 2 times a week, push it a little bit, 16 hours, 18 hours, just to kind of give a little hormesis to the system. And then once a month, shoot for maybe trying a 3-day fast. And that's specific for folks who are dealing with obesity, a lot of the other metabolic issues, maybe have some weight to lose because that'll stabilize things pretty quickly. But if you don't have weight to lose, you tend to not lose much. You might lose it in that day of water weight, but then you gain it right back normally. So these are some strategies that can be very helpful. And even the MD Anderson study with 44,000 women with breast cancer showed that not even what they ate, but when they ate, with a 13-hour or longer break a day from eating, these women who previously had breast cancer had a 70% reduction in their recurrence of cancer. That's free and simple. And so that's something that I think we could all go back to starting to play. I think Dr. Fung's book is really good. It gives you a million different options to do this. There is no way. It has to just be your way. And just start experimenting somewhere and you'll reap the benefits.
So 3 days water fast once a month would be kind of like the idea.
Yeah.
And even
if you don't feel like, and that's for the cancer patient or somebody with a lot of metabolic issues. But if you're someone who's just like wanting to prevent, 2-3 times a year would be great to do a 3-day water fast. Yeah.
That's good. Even people going through chemotherapy would be safe for them. It's good. They have the strength.
Yeah. Dr. Walter Longo's work actually has a 5-day fast before. So 2 days before, day of, and 2 days after chemo. And I've done that for years with patients. They don't need the pre-drugs. They recover much quicker. Their blood counts stay better. They maintain their weight much better than folks who don't follow that approach, and their outcomes are better. They synergize the chemotherapy treatment and actually are more impactful on the tumor reduction while enhancing the mitogenesis of their healthy cells, bringing out new healthy mitochondria to keep the ship in shape.
Oh, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Is there any last message that you want to share for anybody listening out there that needs a little bit of hope?
First of all, I love having these conversations because, as you can tell, I get a little fired up, and it's fun to meet with somebody else who's just as fired up about it. But I really want people to remember that they are far more powerful than they are led to believe. You have so much more wisdom inside of you. Take advantage of it. Find someone who can help you harness what is innately yours and to embrace what is innately yours as well, which is health, vitality, and optimal living.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this amazing training about one of the best approaches to prevent and heal from cancer. And thank you for everything you do. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So beautiful meeting you in person. All the best, Elena. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.